Thank you so much for joining us for this Safe Sanctuaries training for how to use your church as a community internet hotspot. We have Reverend Michelle Foster Beckerleg, our resident Safe Sanctuaries expert, here with us. I'm sure all of you know her, but if you don't, she is a pastor in our conference and is a co author, one of the authors of Safe Sanctuaries in the Virtual World. So, we are so thankful to have her here with us today. And Michelle, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let you take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Havilah, for all you did to get this set up. And I especially want to welcome everyone who is with us this day. Now, as we think about safe sanctuaries and the way it relates to community hotspots, it is a broader category than simply asking the question, how do we protect children from abuse in whatever forms that might take? What we recognize is that, yes, we are still called to prevent child abuse from occurring. In the midst of COVID 19, especially though, it is the broader question of how do we keep one another safe and do no harm. And so, even as I walk through this conversation with you, please know you do not need to take copious notes on everything. Havilah and I are working together, and we will have a resource that will be available at the end of this presentation that you will be able to utilize in whatever manner that you would like. And it does have highlighted on it all of the key points that I am discussing today. So, as we get started, the way that I lay this out is before you say yes to your community becoming an internet hotspot, what are the things that you might need to consider? And I am a person that loves alliteration, so I have broken those down into four categories. And those are connection, capacity, cleanliness, and other considerations. So let's start first with connection. We are a people who love to be in relationship with one another. And sometimes we let our desire for relationship get ahead of what I call the bigger question, which is why. Why would you want your church to be a place where the community can gather and have access to the internet? Is there a need? And that's a question that we often need to wrestle with. The other question that goes there is, does it align with our mission and vision statement? Because that's the other piece of it. Now, where I am serving is we are one church on two campuses, with our second campus being primarily our missional hub. And I was very excited when invited to participate in this conversation because we have gone through this exact conversation that I am offering to you today in order to determine that we were going to offer a community space for what we are calling supervised education. And so the first question is, why do we want to do this? I'm located in Reidsville, North Carolina, and there's quite a good internet access in the downtown area. Well, one of the things that we know is that in the downtown area, most of the restaurants are closed and the cafes and coffee shops are closed because of COVID 19. And so there's not a place for people to gather and have access to the internet. We also recognize that the majority of our schools and therefore our students are located more rurally where internet is actually not even available right now. And here we are sitting in a very conveniently located space with very good internet access that would be able to provide space. And our primary mission and focus where we are is not only to love Jesus Christ, to transform the world, and to make disciples, it is specifically through the venues of education and addressing systemic hunger that we are focused. And so this fits right in line with how are we focusing on education and being a partner with all of our educational venues in our immediate community. So the first question is why? And then how does this align with your mission and vision statement? And then the next question to consider is, well, who is your target group? Is it kindergarten through 5th grade? Is it high school? Is it those that are continuing their education into their adulthood and now need access in a way that maybe they've not needed access previously? Are these students that are mainstreamed within the school and in typical classrooms? Do you have students that you're considering that may have participation usually in a self-contained classroom and need different educational opportunities than those that might be in a typical classroom situation? Are you looking at a population that might have different emotional needs? Those that may be in a school very specific to children with behavioral challenges? Are you looking at providing a space for those that may have some physical disabilities? So, who is your target audience? Who is your target group? That's very, very important because that's going to set the stage for then what might be required in order to meet those needs well. So, who's your target audience? And consider what are their spiritual, emotional, physical, and technical needs as well. Again, I'm serving in one county. I live in a different county. The county in which I serve, every child who has needed an electronic device has been issued one. The county in which I live, not everyone has their electronic devices yet. And so the technological needs will vary from place to place. And so that's important to keep in mind. And then also from a connection standpoint, we think about the internet connection. Do you have the infrastructure to be able to have multiple people doing dynamic activity on the internet all at the same time? And sometimes you say, oh, yeah, we've never had any problem. Everybody sits in their office and works all the time. Well, again, if it is an older infrastructure where you're all connected to the modem and not working wirelessly, um, you may have different bandwidths or different abilities for um, wireless to be able to feed well. So it is my recommendation that from a connection standpoint, from a technical connection standpoint, that you make sure you have someone come and survey your equipment and ask the question, how many can we really have? What is our capacity? How many can we have engaged at one time? And not just connected to the internet, but actively, dynamically searching or engaging on the internet. Because sometimes what we might be able to do in a static website is very different than what might be required for, say, a Zoom call, even now as we are participating. So I invite you to keep that in mind as well. And then the other space is we talk about infrastructure. Okay, we have all these children. We know that we want to do this. We know our why. Now the question becomes, do we have the volunteer or staff capacity to provide what it is that we are seeking? People may think it's a great idea all day long. However, if you don't have the correct supervision, we are in a place where harm could easily be done physically, emotionally, spiritually. So be mindful of that piece of your infrastructure as well. And then another piece of the infrastructure that we have to keep in mind is sometimes good ideas are great until we try and actually make them a reality and realize we don't have the space to accommodate what it is that we're seeking to do. So, do you have the infrastructure of space to do what it is that you are desiring to do? And keeping in mind, infrastructure of space looks very different pre March 14th, 2020 and post March 14th, 2020, which is really when everything around social distancing and masking and sanitation in a brand new way came into our world on a daily basis. So consider again the space that you have. Also, the other question that often comes up when we think about connection is, well, how can we be responsible for where people go on their computers? You know, they might say that they're here to do education, but they're really on YouTube watching basketball videos, or they're on such and such a site playing a video game, or maybe even less transparent than that, they are visiting sites that we believe would be inappropriate. Again, that's a conversation for you to have before you say yes. How will we monitor and what will be our scope of responsibility? In our particular case, one of the things that we said is we will situate the room in such a way that even as we walk around the room, we'll be able to see every computer screen. And so that helps some. We do have a I don't want to say strong firewall, but we do have a firewall also in place to stop the access to some particular sites or keywords, which might lead you to sites, in order to provide a modicum of protection where people may go. Again, that boundary cannot be too strict because then it may also alleviate the possibility of sites that children actually need to visit based on the different requirements or recommendations that their teachers are giving them through virtual schooling and such. So keep that in mind. The other thing I would say is as we have this conversation, my particular experience in the last 10 weeks has been around virtual school in a supervised educational space. When we consider community hotspots, it often expands beyond children that are in traditional school models as we think about this. Community hotspot may also be available or considered for those who are seeking employment and need to come and access computers for job training or for resume building or for even sending out information and resumes and such. It may also be that people are coming to your spot saying, I don't have access to Zoom, to Skype, to any other variety of platforms on which we're now doing interviews when we aren't always comfortable doing those in person. So, again, knowing the why of what you are doing and then the target group will help you walk through all of the questions of connection, which is very important. Now, that also moves us to the next C in all of this, which is capacity. What is the size of the space you are intending to utilize? Capacity. What's your capacity? The sanctuary at our missional hub seats about 225. Pre-COVID, that was our capacity when we're talking about worship. Now, in the midst of COVID, that number's much, much smaller just from counting seats and having us 6 feet apart. What we also have to keep in mind when we talk about capacity is what are the limitations that are set in an effort to do no harm by the government, by our connectional system, and by our local context. And by that, I mean that here in the state of North Carolina, Governor Cooper has said we can have 25 maximum inside with social distancing, and that doesn't take into effect the capacity that your space may hold. As a part of the Western North Carolina Conference, we recognize that our bishop, as a part of our connectional system, has also said, we implore you to hold to that same boundary of 25 or less when and if you gather indoors. Now, I have the capacity for 225. The boundary that's been set, though, is 25. Even still, if I think about my fellowship hall or a classroom, can it safely hold a capacity of 25 people given the needs that they may have for physical connection, being close to one another, for technical connection, and then also for the cleanliness aspect, for the social distancing, for the masking, those sorts of things, of which we'll speak more. And so, from a capacity standpoint, we have to keep all of that in mind. The other thing to consider as we talk about capacity is what might be the space parameters once you add into that whatever physical resources are needed. And by physical resources, I mean tables, chairs, desk, drop cords that are needed for extensions in order for computers to be plugged in or tablets to be plugged in, things such as that. So, again, our fellowship hall, which can normally seat at tables approximately 150, can hold no more than 12 6-foot tables spaced 8 feet apart with plenty of room for circulation as well, and in a configuration where we can see all computers. So we can have up to 25. We should not have more than 12 to 15. And so you see the careful dance of what can be versus what should and could be from a safety perspective. The other thing, and this is just a reminder for all of us, is when you're considering capacity count, remember that that count includes not only the participants, it also includes all of your volunteers or supervisors or coordinators that would also need to be present in that space. So, say you have a huge fellowship hall or a huge gathering space that can accommodate 25 students, whatever their age. Well, that number needs to be bumped down some when you add to that the number of volunteers, coordinators, adult supervisors, and such that you have. And so your capacity number remains the same, but your participant number drops in order to stay in appropriate ratio and within the boundaries that are given you. The other thing is keep in mind, what is your electrical capacity? Just because you have 10 outlets in a room doesn't mean that your infrastructure is able to support all 10 outlets pulling power at the same time. And especially given the age of many of our facilities, that is even more significant that we keep in mind what outlets work, which outlets are connected to other outlets, how might we be able to space out what outlets are used, and what happens if every person that comes needs to use an outlet at the same time. Do we have the ability to address that need? Things we don't often think about until we're in the throes of it. Even when you use power strips and the like, power is still being pulled. So do consider your capacity as it relates to your electrical infrastructure. And then the other piece of this is what hours and days might be best suited to meet the needs of those that you're trying to be in ministry with. How does your cleanliness and your ability to clean and the regular church schedule, whatever the regular church schedule may look like right now, how does that also impact the way that these spaces might be available? And so I offer to you both connection and capacity, and all of this under the umbrella of do no harm. Let us love one another and keep one another safe. Which then moves us to our third C before we ever say yes to a community hotspot, and that is cleanliness. It is said that cleanliness is next to godliness. And in this new era in which we find ourselves living, we have a new understanding of cleanliness. Please keep in mind that this is still the most overlooked and under thought through process of anything in which we engage. And the truth of the matter is, if we clean too much, we will never know that that saved us from the possible virus invading wherever we are. If we do not clean enough, we unfortunately may be able to reap the repercussions of that action. And so I always say, seek to do more than to do less. And so, with that in mind, to ask the questions, do we have the appropriate supplies to keep people safe from a cleanliness standpoint. I have learned in our experience that you always need to have extra mask on hand. Um, Again, we were working with children and youth, and inevitably one or two would show up without a mask or would play with their mask so much that the elastic earpiece would break. And so there would need to be a need for a new mask. Do you have enough hand sanitizer? And if you think the answer is yes, multiply that by two. Some people are overzealous with hand sanitizer right now, and others are afraid to use it because they don't want to run out. And so make sure you have it available and that you utilize it often and I would almost say frivolously. Make sure it's shared far and wide. The other piece of it is consider antibacterial wipes because there are places that need to be cleaned where regular cleaner may not be able to get, whether that's the computer keyboard, doorknobs, things such as that, that the antibacterial wipes are very helpful. We even clean every pen and pencil that is used for our sign in. After you use it, it goes in one container and then someone comes behind you and cleans that and puts it back in the sanitized container. So consider antibacterial wipes. The next item on the list is a thermometer. Some people say, oh, it doesn't matter. Others say, this is one of the greatest steps we can take. Again, I would recommend that we seek to be overly cautious and overly safe rather than find ourselves in a situation in which we say we should have, or we could have, or why didn't we? And so, one of our practices as we offer to the community a hotspot is that every person that enters our door has their thermometer taken with one of the infrared thermometers, the digital ones that just scan your head, and we immediately have that information. And we ask all of the what I call the COVID-19 screening questions. Do you have a cough? Have you been around anyone? Have you had a fever? Do you feel ill? Those sorts of things. And um, to be able to mark that we've asked the questions, here's their temperature, in addition to using hand sanitizer and masking and social distancing from a cleanliness perspective. I spoke about the log for contact tracing. We are a church that's wide open usually. And so it is a very different situation in which, as you walk through the door, we ask, do you need a mask? I noticed you don't have one on. Would you please sign in here and let us take your temperature? Part of that is by direction of the health department that should the need become necessary to do contact tracing, it is much easier to remember who you've been in contact with if there's actually a log of that rather than try and rely on your brain. And so we do have a log in which everyone signs in, and our children, I mean, they just know the routine. You stand at the door and wait until the table is cleared inside the building. When the table is cleared, you come in, we'll take your temperature, you'll answer the questions, you'll take your hand sanitizer. I'll sign most of the children in just because it's faster, and then they go and sit down. And so consider, again, from a cleanliness perspective, how is it that you are keeping a log or documentation should the need arise for contact tracing? And then the next two seem like a duh until it gets down to the brass tacks of it. Do you have cleaning supplies? They are a little bit easier to find these days, and yet still it's like finding that needle in a haystack. Do you have the appropriate cleaning supplies to clean whatever needs to be cleaned? And who's going to do the cleaning? Again, you may say, oh, we have a cleaning crew, or we have a janitorial service, or we have a handyman, or whatever it is. Okay. The way that we cleaned prior to March 14th might look different or may have a higher expectation than the way that we clean it than it has been, and now the way that it needs to be done. We are fortunate to be able to partner with an office supply company here in our local community that does have access to antibacterial, antiviral, antifungal, germicide, and viricide. And it's actually, they are the supplier to several of the colleges and universities around us. And they have gifted us with a case of cleaner. And that cleaner we use constantly. As soon as children leave the educational space, every table is sprayed. The plastic tables are sprayed and left wet to air dry, because that's the most effective way for that cleaner to take place. On the tables that have laminate on them, we cannot let it sit and air dry. So we let it sit for 3 to 5 minutes and then wipe off with a paper towel. Every doorknob, door handle, push bar, all of that is wiped before and after, before we open and after we close every day. Now, here's the big one, friends. The commode, the sink, the door handles to the restroom, and all of the handles on the sink. We have chosen to err on the side of caution, and they are cleaned every single time someone uses the restroom. And that's part of what we have said in our volunteer training. Not only are you going to supervise children and help in some ways with children's schoolwork, you also get to clean the commode and the handles following every child. And it's not necessarily the bowl that we are cleaning internally as much as the commode handle, the seat, the bottom side and the top side, as well as the seat once it is lifted up, cleaning all of that. And again, just erring on the side of caution. That takes a lot of cleaning supplies. It also requires that we have a lot of plastic gloves on hand, because we invite and encourage our volunteers to wear gloves when they clean all of these surfaces. One, the chemical is a pretty strong chemical, but more than that, if there is anything that might be contagious, then they do have that primary protection as their first layer of defense, even as they're cleaning with a paper towel. So do keep that in mind as well. Now, other considerations, and this is just from experience. How do you handle food and drink? If people are in a space for any number of hours, they're going to want something to munch on or something to drink. Whose responsibility is that? Is that something that you, as the provider, would want to offer? Is that something that you say, no food and drinks allowed because we're wearing our mask and we're not taking them off at all? Or is there a middle ground in there? Again, we have our supervised educational space from 8 a.m. until noon. And so we recognize, especially for our younger children, 4 hours is a long time without food or drink. And where we have landed on that is that our water fountains are not accessible, and that you are invited to bring your own water and water only. We don't want juice, we don't want soda, any of that, because it creates more of a mess if it is spilled. And to bring your own snack if you would like a snack. And so, of course, while you're having your drink or your snack, your mask can be off. Otherwise, your mask has to be on the whole time. Now, what has been interesting in that, and again, one of those things we don't know until we work through it, is also then how do you handle Zoom or video calls? If there are numerous people in a room and the expectation is that people will keep their mask on, then what do you do when, especially as a child, you're looking at your Zoom and you're on class with all of your friends and no one else has their mask on because they're at home, and you are in a gathered setting where masks are required? Well, we ask them to keep their mask on. Now, we do have, for example, a couple of students that are in Spanish immersion. And so part of that is the teacher needs to see their mouth and things like that, or in band class, if they're talking about amateur, things like that, and their mouth needs to be seen, then they're allowed to pull their mask down. And we have tried to place those students in a place where if their mask is down and they're speaking, that the spray would be away from every other child and not targeted in any way. Those are the things that you need to think through based again on who is your target group and what are their needs. Um, and then the other piece to consider is if you have someone that would like to participate in your indoor community hotspot space that has a health condition that precludes them from wearing a mask. How is it that you're going to respond to that? There are no easy answers. I invite you to keep that in mind, though, as you move through asking the question, what are the needs and how are we going to address them? Um, we've had some volunteers, I will say just parenthetically, that have said, oh, I can't wear a mask because, and fill in the blank. And we've said, well, we're trying to model for the students how to care well for one another. And while we respect that you are not able, we're also going to ask that maybe we find a different place in order for you to use your gifts, because it's hard to explain sometimes to younger children why so and so doesn't have to, but they have to. And so I just invite you to keep that in mind and to know that that will be a wrestling as it comes up. Now, before I move on very quickly, just I see nothing in the chat bar, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to put those in the chat, um, even if it is related to your own personal context and what it is that you're wrestling with. Seeing none and seeing no activity in the chat, we'll continue then and move on to the second piece of this, which is, so we have said yes, and we do want to do this, and we know our why, and we think we've thought through everything that needs to be thought through. So what are our steps now? Using the same C alliteration, I'm going to walk through once you have said yes. And first of all, train your volunteers. People get excited about being involved and they rise up to whatever level of expectation is offered to them. So make sure you train them in what is expected and what it is that they are clearly saying yes to. And that begins with Safe Sanctuaries. Again, Safe Sanctuaries has been around since 1996, and we think, oh, everybody knows. Everybody's had a background check. Everybody does what's safe. That is our hope and our prayer. And if that's the case, then having a renewal training or reminder of what is important will not be painful for them. Instead, they will welcome it with open arms because they know that they are a part of doing no harm. So train your volunteers, and even more so, train them to the context in which they are going to be volunteering. We had to have clear training around, okay, here's what Zoom is. Some of our adults who are retired educators weren't clear about what Zoom was and what it would look like. We didn't go through a ton of training about what's Canvas and Seesaw and North Carolina Ed and that sort of thing, but did say, here are the different platforms that you might see children using. If you don't know how to navigate it, don't worry, just ask. There are everyday people here who do know how to navigate it. At the same time, if you have a child, for example, who needs to speak their sight words out loud and record them, let them speak them aloud. Don't give them the word and then have them say it. Like, let them learn how to do it, even as if they were in school. If you have a child that needs to read aloud to you, it's okay for you and them to pull off to the side of the room, but it is not appropriate for you and that person to go into another classroom one-on-one. Again, when we think about reading one-on-one with someone, we think about literally that one-to-one. And so how do we navigate that differently? We even set up in one room, actually a reading room. And so we recognized that we had a couple students that daily needed to read aloud to someone. And we just said, okay, so-and-so is ready to read now. XYZ, are you ready to read also? Okay, why don't you and your partner go in the room, and with the door open, you all can read aloud. And so that way we had 2 adults, 2 children being able to read aloud and accomplish what needed to be accomplished while also following safe sanctuaries. Again, we often don't think about cleaning the commode as part of a training, but given the particular context of providing an internet hotspot, if that is something that you believe is important in the cleanliness, then you need to train about what is expected there, how to use the chemicals, whether to let it air dry or wipe it off, and those sorts of things. Also, when you think about connection, it's also about connecting with the parents, being very clear with what the expectations are for the parents, what it is that the parents or guardians can expect from you, what it is that you are expecting from the students, and being clear about the purpose for which you are operating. We were very clear that we were here to supervise children who were needing a internet connection for virtual learning. We were not responsible for their grades, nor were we responsible for keeping them on task any more than we were responsible for keeping the whole room on task. That we weren't one-to-one with a student walking them through every single step of their day. We did expect that every student would bring with them exactly what they needed, that we would have some extra supplies on hand should a child forget something or come across a need that they were not aware, i.e., get a piece of construction paper and draw a picture. Okay, we had construction paper, but that's not your normal supply that you would think about keeping in your child's backpack. That they were to bring their own snack and drink, and that we would provide a bin that if there were things from day to day that they did not need to take home but wanted to keep in their space, that they would put in their bin and it would be safe for the next day. The exception to that is that they were not allowed to leave their electronics overnight. So things like that. We ended up having to give away a lot of earbuds because children forgot their earbuds from day to day, which is not uncommon, or their earbuds, the little earpiece would come off and it would become uncomfortable, things like that. And so we were grateful for the community support in gathering those supplies. Also about attendance, we needed to honor our volunteers and the time that they were saying that they would be present in making sure we had the students to be present also. And so the way our supervised educational space works is that on Monday, so 3 days ago, if you were a parent, you would receive an email that says, we're looking ahead to the following week, to the week of September 27th. When is it that you anticipate your child will be present? So that we know how to staff according to the children that will be present. There's no need to have 4 volunteers if you only have 4 students. There is a need for 4 volunteers in our case if you have 12 to 15 students, things such as that. So that's how we handled attendance. And there was no cost involved, and that was a very clearly communicated expectation that there was no cost involved. However, if you began to take advantage of the situation and consistently showed up late, that there may be a penalty, a financial penalty for not picking your child up on time. So to keep that in mind, and then also to communicate clearly with parents and with students if there are any medical concerns and how it is that they'll be notified should someone present signs or symptoms or be diagnosed with COVID. And again, we laid that out ahead of time and we said, our expectation is if your child has a fever of 100.4 or higher, you will not bring them for 72 hours. If these particular symptoms have been exhibited by your child, they will not participate. If while they're here, these symptoms begin to be shown, then you'll immediately be called and asked to pick up your child. So again, very similar to school, here's what's expected and here's the way we're going to handle situations. From a safe sanctuaries perspective, it was also very important that we knew exactly who was picking up children and who had permission to pick up children. And that if I was very familiar with Kate always picking up her children, and then all of a sudden someone else came and they said, "Oh, yeah, that's grandma." Well, I would look on the log and see if grandma Helen had permission to pick up the children. And if so, we asked for ID just to verify, because again, at the end of the day, we want to do what is faithful and prudent to keep our children and families safe. So that's important to keep in mind as well. Once you've said yes and you know what your capacity can be and should be, continue to be adaptable to what you find out as you walk through your time together. We were very clear that we were not going to sit one on one with our students. At the same time, we were that when Jane Doe kindergartner did a particular assignment, she needed someone beside her to know which buttons to push, because it would say, click on the letter A to go to your next situation. Well, maneuvering a mouse, as you know, and getting it hovering in the right exact spot to click on it is not always that easy. And so we sat with her through that, and that we'll be cleaning things that we don't normally think about cleaning. I assume that the door handles get wiped down once or twice a week as our cleaning service comes through. Now I recognize that I can't assume, and I need to be a part of the solution. And with an antibacterial wipe, go through and say, well, I know that we've opened and closed this door multiple times. We need to clean this door handle. We need to clean this push bar. We even sanitize chairs because they are plastic chairs, things such as that. So do keep that in mind. And in all of this, Safe Sanctuaries really is about protecting our children. And very often we say protecting our children from abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, ritual abuse, emotional abuse, and neglect. And now in this time of COVID-19, what we understand is that even as we want to respond to the needs of our community, we're still called to protect our children. And now, while it may not necessarily be a form of abuse, we think about that even more so in the realm of technology, and in saying, what does it mean to do no harm and to love one another well? And so I invite you, as you consider community hotspots, to ask the why. Why are we doing this? How might we do it well? And what are the ways in which we can best love those who are seeking a place for connection, physical, emotional, technologically, and such? Thank you for your time and for your participation. And I wish you God's blessings this day. Go in peace, and may all that you do, even in the face of COVID-19, be a revelation of God's goodness and love in our midst.